election, more than 160 million Americans voted more than ever before. And in fact, the Trump administration's Homeland Security official charged with protecting elections deemed the election the most secure election in American history. Is that correct, Ms. Abrams?
That is correct.
And former Attorney General Barr stated that there was no evidence of widespread voter fraud that could have changed the outcome of the 2020 election. Is that right?
That is also correct.
So my problem is this. Why do you think 361 bills have been introduced in 47 states that would restrict access to the polls when, in fact, the way things were running was working for the people of this country? They were voting by mail like never before. They were exercising their way to vote, their right to vote, and they did it safely. Why did this happen?
With all due respect to Secretary of State Gardner, I would actually refer us back to Senator Sheldon Whitehouse's commentary, and that is this. We saw an increased participation from communities that are considered unfortunate or that are not favorable to Republican victories. No one is entitled to win. I am a person who is a living example. There is no entitlement to victory, but we are all entitled to participation. And what these laws have done in stunning and uniform fashion is reduce entitlement to participation. They've done so by targeting behaviors that are specifically attributable to communities that voted in opposition of Republican values. Now, that is not to say that every person of color intends to vote Democratic. It's not to say that every young person votes Democratic. But when the overwhelming majority in those communities exercise their right to vote in this last election, we have seen a raft of laws that have been targeted at their behaviors. And when laws are targeted at the behaviors of communities of color, that is not only reminiscent of the Mississippi Plan and the Jim Crow laws, as Dr. Anderson has so clearly played out, those are intentionally a resurgence of voter suppression similar to Jim Crow, which is why we use that language, because we cannot leave our history behind.
Thank you. And as Reverend Warnock said earlier, maybe it just boils down to some words, and that is that some people don't want some people to vote. Ms. Eiffel, can you tell me about how rare voter fraud is? I think there was a recent editorial in a major newspaper talking about since 2000, Oregon has sent out more than 100 million mail-in ballots and documented only about a dozen cases of fraud, rounded to the seventh decimal point. That's 0.0000001% of all ballots. Ms. Eiffel?
That is correct, Senator Klobuchar. You have a better chance of being struck by lightning than finding widespread voter fraud. And in fact, President Carter spoke out about the report that was referenced earlier. He believes that the report was being distorted to support the provisions of SB 202. In fact, what the report called for was a deeper study of vote by mail. They were basing their study on 2005 to 2008. And the report specifically noted that we have two states, Oregon and Washington State, that do all voting by mail. And there is no significant voter fraud in those two states. And so voter ID, for absentee voting, that's actually quite unusual. There are only three, I guess now with Georgia, 4 states that require photo ID for absentee voting. And that's what we're talking about with SB 202. It's actually a rare and unusual thing.
Thank you. And we are going to be marking up the SF, Senate File 1, in the Rules Committee. And so I'm pretty familiar with this bill. And could you explain, Ms. Eiffel, why, yes, it has some very important standards for voting, given what we're seeing, the assault on voting across the country. But why, given that we have not had any federal campaign legislation passed since McCain-Feingold, which was basically dismantled by the courts, it is time to also focus on all of the dark money flooding into our politics, as well as ethics rules that are necessary for all of us. And that used to be a bipartisan issue.
Well, I think, Senator Klobuchar, it's important to see this all of a piece. This is about access to the political process. This is about ordinary people having access to the political process. We think of the right to vote as sacred, the casting of the ballot, the counting of that ballot. But if there are forces that neutralize the ability of that ballot to have meaning, then Congress needs to examine that also, so that citizens can feel that they truly have a role in our democracy and have their voice heard. It can't be a sham, it can't be a shell. When activists marched and risked their lives for the right to vote during the civil rights movement, they weren't just looking at the ceremonial act of casting a ballot. They truly believed that being able to participate equally in the political process would allow them to meaningfully change the condition of their lives and communities. And so everything that bears on the ability to give that vote meaning, it seems to me, is relevant and important for this committee to consider.
Thank you. And with your indulgence, just one very fast question with a fast answer, Ms. Abrams. One of the things as I prepare for this hearing that I'm chairing next month, one of the arguments made is that, oh, it'll be so hard for states to enact these. However, we already have 43 states with early voting, 21 states with same-day registration, 19 states with automatic voter registration, 45 states that allowed all voters to cast a ballot by mail last year. In 2018, Michigan approved many changes to its election procedures that went into effect before the November 2020 election. Would you agree that states like Georgia and others have been able to implement these changes in a correct way without a problem?
Absolutely.
Thank you.